On paper, the American machine is grinding to a halt. Interest rates are suffocating the housing market, capital is freezing up, and the Federal Reserve is actively trying to slow the economy down to kill inflation. By every textbook definition, the United States should be bracing for a recession. And yet, standing in the White House, Donald Trump has just declared that the exact opposite is happening. He isn't predicting a recovery, he is declaring the dawn of a golden age, an industrial explosion he claims will deliver results nobody has ever seen within just 6 months.
We're going to have, it's the golden age. I say it's the golden age of America. When these factories and plants open up by the thousands, Toyota just announced they're going to spend $10 billion building plants to make Toyotas. So they're coming from Germany, they're coming from Japan, they're coming from Canada. Many factories are coming in because they don't want to pay tariffs. Very simple. They're coming in and they're spending they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. Our car industry lost 58% of their capacity over the years. They went to Europe, they went to Mexico, Japan, they went all over. They went to South Korea. And now it's just the opposite. They're all coming back. We have an age that's coming up, the likes of which I don't think this country has never seen. And I just look so forward to the results. You're going to see results in 6 months to a year.
Is this just holiday delusion? Most analysts thought so. They focused on his jokes about Christmas decorations and ignored the substance. But they missed the signal. Buried in his speech was a specific, radical blueprint to bypass the two biggest enemies of American growth, the Federal Reserve's interest rates and the nation's failing power grid. Trump revealed a secret regulatory loophole regarding electricity that doesn't just change the economy, it fundamentally alters the trajectory of the AI war with China. He is proposing to decouple Silicon Valley from the U.S. government's own infrastructure. So the question isn't just about the economy, it is much deeper. How does Trump plan to defeat Beijing in the AI arms race while simultaneously fighting a war against his own Federal Reserve? The answer lies in a secret about electricity that almost everyone ignored. To understand the gravity of Trump's golden age claim, we have to look at the timeline of deindustrialization. This isn't just a political talking point, it is a 30-year economic cycle coming to a violent end. From 2001, when China entered the World Trade Organization, the prevailing logic in Washington was globalization. Capital flowed efficiently to where labor was cheapest. The result was a massive transfer of industrial capacity. As Trump noted, the U.S. car industry lost nearly 58% of its capacity during this era. Factories migrated to Mexico, Europe, and Asia, leaving the American industrial base hollowed out. Fast forward to 2022, and the script flipped. The post-COVID inflation crisis forced the Federal Reserve to declare war on the economy. Chairman Jerome Powell raised interest rates at the fastest pace in 40 years. His goal was stability, to cool down demand and crush inflation. This brings us to the present moment and the core conflict. In his speech, Trump attacked this stability mindset as incompetence. He argues that the U.S. is succeeding despite the Fed trying to slow it down. But notice his proof. He didn't point to stock prices. He pointed to Toyota. He cited Toyota's recent $10 billion investment not as a diplomatic victory, but as a calculated hostage negotiation. He said they don't want to pay tariffs. This marks a definitive shift from the era of free trade to the era of forced localization. This sets the stage for a massive collision of philosophies. The Federal Reserve wants to cool the economy to kill inflation. Trump wants to supercharge it with deregulation and protectionism to force a boom. And he is betting everything that he can win this tug-of-war.
Trump's strategy rests on three specific mechanisms designed to force this golden age. First is the pay-to-play market. Trump's mention of Toyota signals that access to the U.S. market is now a privilege, not a right. By threatening massive tariffs, Washington is erecting a toll booth. Companies cannot afford to lose the U.S. customer, so they are forced to build factories inside the wall. This reverses the global flow of capital. Instead of U.S. dollars leaking out to pay for imports, foreign capital is forced to flow in. Trump is effectively vacuuming industrial capacity from Europe and Asia, leaving their manufacturing bases hollowed out. Second is the energy bypass, the critical pivot. Trump claims the U.S. is leading China in AI by a lot, but correctly identifies the bottleneck: electricity. AI data centers are voracious energy consumers, and the current U.S. public grid is slow and bureaucratic. Trump's solution is the energy bypass. He admitted to allowing new tech plants to build their own electric capacity on site. This is a massive move toward deregulation. By allowing tech giants to build private modular nuclear reactors or gas turbines off-grid, he removes the government bottleneck entirely. This creates a two-track economy: a slow public grid for citizens and a hyperspeed private energy network for the AI industrial complex. Third is the inflation gamble. A golden age requires cheap money, but the Fed is keeping money expensive. Trump intends to break this stance, promising a new Fed chair who favors lower rates. But here lies the danger. If you trigger a manufacturing boom, increasing demand for labor and materials, and flood the market with cheap cash, you create the perfect recipe for inflation. Trump is betting that productivity gains from AI will offset rising prices. It is a high-stakes gamble. Geopolitically, this is a flashing red light for Beijing. China's economic recovery plan relies on exporting the new three: EVs, batteries, and solar panels. Trump's strategy erects a fortress against this. Tariffs deny China the U.S. market. Forced localization steals their supply chains, and most importantly, the energy bypass negates China's infrastructure advantage. If the U.S. combines its silicon supremacy with a deregulated private energy sector, China risks being locked out of the high-end AI ecosystem. The U.S. is building a closed loop: American chips, powered by American private energy, protected by American tariffs.
However, skeptical economists argue that this golden age is built on a dangerous contradiction. Critics point out a fundamental flaw. You cannot simply will interest rates down without consequences. If Trump successfully triggers a manufacturing boom, opening thousands of factories in 6 months, the demand for labor, steel, and energy will skyrocket. In an economy that is already at full employment, this creates massive inflationary pressure. Critics warn that pouring gasoline on an already hot economy could force the Federal Reserve to keep rates higher for longer, leading to a stagflation crisis rather than a golden age. Furthermore, there is the environmental risk. The energy bypass sounds efficient, but deregulating private power plants, potentially nuclear or gas, right next to data centers raises massive safety and environmental concerns. Local communities may resist, leading to legal battles that could slow this 6-month timeline significantly. Finally, China is not standing still. While the U.S. builds walls, Beijing is pivoting to the global south, exporting its EV and battery technology to Southeast Asia and Africa, potentially isolating the U.S. market from the next generation of green supply chains. We are witnessing a high-stakes economic experiment. Donald Trump is proposing a future where the United States acts as a massive gravity well, sucking in capital and factories from the rest of the world to fuel its own resurgence. His golden age relies on 3 radical bets: that foreign companies will relocate rather than retaliate, that private power plants can be built faster than the grid can crumble, and that the Federal Reserve will blink first in the war on interest rates. He promised results in 6 months. We are about to find out if the energy bypass is the key to American dominance or the start of an inflationary bubble. What do you think? Is building unregulated private power plants the genius move to beat China, or a disaster waiting to happen? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. We're very, very unhappy with him, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
Donald Trump is back in the White House, and this time he's not just rewriting trade policy, he's aiming to rewrite the rules of global power. His latest move? A high-stakes ultimatum to China and India. If they don't stop buying Russian oil, they could face punishing U.S. tariffs. The clock is ticking. 50 days or the hammer falls. But here's the catch. This strategy, bold as it is, may end up hurting the very economy it's meant to protect. And right now, the world is holding its breath.
In a dramatic shift, President Trump is no longer targeting Russia directly. Instead, he's aiming at the financial arteries that feed Moscow's war chest, the oil revenues flowing from its largest customers. In 2024 alone, Russia earned $192 billion from oil exports, according to the International Energy Agency. China and India accounted for the lion's share, roughly 20% and 36% of their total imports respectively. Trump's plan is clear. If Putin won't come to the negotiating table, then Beijing and New Delhi will be forced to make him. The method? Secondary tariffs, sweeping penalties on all goods from countries that keep buying Russian oil. It's Trump's version of economic chess. But the question isn't just whether it's aggressive, it's whether it's sustainable.
The global oil market is a fragile balance, and Trump's move risks tipping it over. Russia exports more than 7 million barrels of oil per day. Cutting off that supply, even indirectly, would leave a gaping hole in the energy system. OPEC, with limited spare capacity, can't fill the void overnight. Analysts from Kepler and UBS warn prices could soar above $100 per barrel. That's not just bad news for the global economy, it's politically toxic at home. Trump has long branded himself as the president of low gas prices, but this maneuver risks igniting the very inflation he vowed to crush. So as he dangles this tariff threat, the real danger isn't just Moscow's response, it's the price Americans might pay at the pump.
Xi Jinping isn't blinking. China has made it clear, coercion won't end the war in Ukraine. With deep energy ties to Russia and a proven ability to bypass sanctions, including years of importing Iranian oil through intermediaries, China knows how to navigate pressure. More importantly, China understands timing. With trade talks still unfolding, Xi Jinping is likely weighing two priorities: maintain access to cheap Russian oil and avoid direct economic confrontation with the U.S. Rather than confront Trump head-on, China may subtly reduce volumes to appear flexible, while strategically holding the line. Xi Jinping's goal is to stay in control, not to be seen caving to U.S. threats. And unless the U.S. enforces these tariffs with full conviction, something still uncertain, China sees this threat as more theater than turning point.
Trump's secondary tariff threat is dramatic, but it may be more symbolic than practical. In March, he signed an executive order authorizing 25% tariffs on countries importing Venezuelan oil. But enforcement? It never came. Even now, he's refusing to disclose specifics, only saying the measures would be very biting and very bad for the countries involved. That ambiguity, deliberate or strategic, keeps adversaries guessing, but it also signals hesitation. Within his own team, there's debate. Some push for softer financial sanctions on firms or individuals. Others call for broader tariffs. But the political risk remains high. A full-blown energy shock right before an election year? That's a scenario Trump may want to avoid, no matter how tough the rhetoric sounds.
This isn't just about tariffs. It's about leverage. Trump is using oil as a bargaining chip, trying to corner both Putin and Xi in the same move.
But geopolitics is rarely that simple. If the threat works, he could shift the global oil trade and squeeze Russia harder than ever. If it fails, the result could be soaring prices, fractured diplomacy, and a more emboldened China. Right now, Beijing is holding firm, and Trump? He's gambling that his threat alone will be enough. But as the 50-day countdown ticks on, one thing is certain: whether it's a real weapon or a symbolic show, this move will test not just Trump's resolve, but China's limits. And the outcome may redraw the rules of power between the world's two biggest economies.
In the highlands of Tibet, a construction site is taking shape. Silent, remote, but loaded with consequence. Xi Jinping has launched what's being called the Project of the Century, a mega dam 3 times larger than the Three Gorges. But as concrete pours, so does anxiety across South Asia. The dam, located on the Yarlung-Zangpo River, is projected to cost $167 billion and generate up to 300 million megawatt-hours of electricity annually. That's more than 3 times the output of the iconic Three Gorges Dam. Its location in Nyingchi, southeastern Tibet, is not random. The river here drops over 6,500 feet in just 31 miles, making it an unparalleled source of hydropower. Xi Jinping is positioning this as a cornerstone in China's pledge for carbon neutrality by 2060. But it's not just about clean energy. It's about water, because per capita, China has only 1/3 of the world's average fresh water, despite its vast territory and population of 1.4 billion. But the cost isn't just financial. It's environmental and political. The Yarlung-Tsangpo flows into India as the Brahmaputra, and then into Bangladesh as the Jamuna River. Millions depend on its seasonal flow for agriculture, drinking water, and flood regulation. Any disruption upstream, deliberate or accidental, can become catastrophic downstream. Environmentalists warn of irreversible consequences. The region is a designated biodiversity hotspot and lies along an active seismic fault. Landslides, habitat destruction, and cultural displacement loom large. Yet no clear environmental review has been made public. No regional water-sharing agreement exists. While Beijing insists the project won't harm neighbors, India officially raised concerns in December 2024 and reiterated them in bilateral meetings in January 2025. Bangladesh, too, is watching with unease. Xi's megadam, intended to showcase strength, risks becoming a wedge that drives suspicion deeper between China and its neighbors. In India, local leaders in Arunachal Pradesh have already called for a counter-project, the Upper Siang Hydropower Dam, downstream from China's site. A regional dam race may be unfolding, with tensions not seen since the 2020 border clash that left over 20 dead. Meanwhile, Bangladesh fears for its rice-producing delta, already strained by rising seas and shifting monsoons. What's at stake is more than just water, it's regional cohesion. South Asia's fragile balance, already fraying from China's growing defense ties with Pakistan and India's closer alignment with the United States, is now threatened by infrastructure designed without consultation. This dam, in its sheer scale and speed, signals Beijing's willingness to act unilaterally, even when consequences spill far beyond its borders. All of this is unfolding as the US-China trade war escalates. Under President Trump's second term, tariffs have climbed above 50% on critical imports. Semiconductor software, rare earth minerals, and clean tech infrastructure have become battlegrounds. China's megadam serves as a domestic economic stimulus, but also a strategic message that it won't wait for global consensus to secure resources. Yet in acting decisively, Beijing risks isolating itself. South Asian nations may now pivot further toward US-led partnerships, not because of ideology, but as a hedge against unchecked regional dominance. What Xi presents as resilience, others may interpret as disregard. In Xi Jinping's vision, this megadam is an engineering triumph and a national necessity. But in the eyes of his neighbors, it may become a monument to mistrust, one that carves deeper fault lines into the Himalayan landscape.
Donald Trump says the US has reached a trade deal with Japan. He's calling it perhaps the largest deal ever made, to include vehicles and agricultural products.
Welcome back. Dow back towards session highs as we have some breaking news on the trade front with Eamon Javers at the White House. Eamon?
President Donald Trump has just fired another shot in the global trade war. In 1 week, he sealed major tariff deals with Japan and the Philippines. He calls them the largest trade agreements in history. But beyond the headlines, behind the fanfare, another story is unfolding. A silent counterstrike from Beijing. Because while Trump signs deals, China is calculating its next move.
Just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan.
Let's begin with what Trump just pulled off. First, Japan. The United States will now cut its auto tariff on Japanese cars from 25% down to 15%. In return, Tokyo commits a massive $550 billion investment and loan package to the U.S., aimed at building resilient supply chains in pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. Autos are critical here. They make up over 25% of Japan's exports to the U.S. This deal offers immediate relief to Japanese automakers, who had spent months absorbing tariff costs just to stay competitive. As the news broke, Toyota stock jumped 11%, Honda and Nissan surged 8%. The market reaction was clear, so was Trump's message. He wins, others follow. Then came the Philippines. Trump announced a new 19% tariff on Philippine imports, up from the 17% he had threatened in April. In exchange, the Philippines will eliminate all tariffs on American goods. That's not all. The deal includes a military cooperation clause, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth present during negotiations at the White House. The details remain fluid, and Manila has yet to confirm the final terms, but the geopolitical alignment is unmistakable: a trade agreement wrapped in strategic defense. Now here's where the tension deepens. While Trump celebrates, China watches, closely, silently, but not idly. Beijing hasn't responded with public outrage. Instead, it's adopting a strategy Chinese analysts now call "let him cook," letting Trump isolate U.S. allies one by one through aggressive bilateral deals. And while some countries yield under pressure, China is reinforcing its own alliances. It's warning partners, if you sell out to Trump for a tariff deal, you may pay the price elsewhere. In parallel, China is ramping up its leadership role in RCEP, tightening control over critical minerals and restricting exports of rare earths and titanium, assets essential for global tech and defense. Trump's own tariffs may even backfire. A clause in his latest deals with Japan and Indonesia allows tariffs to spike up to 40% on any product that includes materials from China, a direct strike at supply chains, but also a potential driver of inflation at home. Economists from the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and Meiji Yasuda Institute warn that prices in the U.S. could climb in the second half of 2025 as companies pass those tariff costs on to American consumers.
We're strong. We have a lot of money flowing in. The tariffs are kicked in better than anybody other than me and a few of the people in the room thought could happen.
Trump isn't done. With his self-imposed deadline of August 1, the president is racing to finalize a series of bilateral trade frameworks. Alongside Japan and the Philippines, he's also announced agreements with Indonesia, Vietnam, and the UK. Each deal follows the same pattern: reduce tariffs if the country offers something in return. be it agricultural purchases, tech investment, or strategic alignment. The real goal? To corner China ahead of expected trade talks in Stockholm. Trump wants to walk into that room holding leverage, pointing to a world that has already bowed to his terms. But Xi Jinping may be holding leverage of his own. With Japan, the Philippines, and others now bound by complex deals, China could offer deeper integration, long-term stability, and access to raw materials that the US itself cannot easily replace. Trump may have scored short-term victories. He's won applause, headlines, and for now, the market's confidence. But the real contest isn't in Tokyo or Manila. It's in China. The US-China rivalry remains the core battleground. Trump's tariffs may have changed the board, but the game is far from over. And Xi Jinping is still in it.
And there are a number of trade-distorting measures, unfair competition and unlevel playing field challenges that the EU wants China to meaningfully address.
A historic handshake in Beijing. On July 24th, EU leaders Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa sat across from President Xi Jinping in the 29th EU-China summit. It marked 50 years of diplomatic ties, but there was no celebration. Instead, there was pressure. Pressure from trade imbalances, pressure from global sanctions, and pressure from Washington, where President Trump is about to launch another wave of tariffs. The stakes? Not just trade, but the future of EU-China relations and Xi's ability to outmaneuver his most vocal adversary, Donald Trump. From the beginning, China held the upper hand. Beijing hosted the summit, set the tone, and narrowed it to just one day. While European leaders arrived with demands, fairer market access, relaxed export controls, and a call for transparency, China responded with calm resistance. The EU pointed to a €300 billion trade deficit in 2024, as reported by Eurostat, with Chinese goods continuing to flood European markets. They raised alarms over Beijing's grip on rare earth exports, which the European Commission had flagged as critical to green and defense industries. And they demanded relief from overcapacity in electric vehicles and wind turbines. But China didn't flinch. Instead, Xi framed the complaints as misunderstandings. He avoided direct commitments, refused to shift on industrial subsidies, and dismissed calls to scale back restrictions on EU medical and tech firms. Behind this diplomacy was a quiet message: China won't bend, especially not when it sees the West divided and distracted by Trump. Back in Washington, President Trump wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was actively shaping the narrative. Earlier this year, Trump reignited tariffs on Chinese goods, hitting semiconductors, EV batteries, and medical products with duties up to 145%. And beginning August 1st, he's threatening new tariffs, this time aimed squarely at Europe, up to 30%, unless new bilateral deals are made. The result? European markets are flooded with Chinese products that the US no longer accepts. According to the Polish Business Daily, imports of Chinese goods into Europe spiked in May and June, creating what economists are calling industrial deflation and triggering insolvency risks in core EU sectors. Europe finds itself cornered. Countries like Germany and Spain advocate deeper trade with China to preserve growth. France and Poland demand more protection. Trump sees the division and presses harder. His administration's message is clear: align with US trade terms or face economic pain. The EU, lacking a unified trade and investment policy, struggles to respond. Meanwhile, Xi watches closely, knowing every move by Trump weakens Europe's bargaining position. So, where does this leave us? Xi Jinping walked into the summit with control and left with clarity. Europe is not ready to decouple, nor strong enough to challenge China directly. The summit didn't deliver a breakthrough, but it revealed a strategic truth. In a world fractured by tariffs and politics, China and the EU may not become allies, but they remain locked in interdependence. And as Trump's August 1st deadline looms, the real battle isn't over tariffs, it's over influence. Xi is playing a long game, Trump is playing hardball. And Europe? Stuck in the middle, forced to choose between the two, or risk losing both.
The fight between U.S. and Mexico over genetically modified corn, known as GM corn, appears to be settled, for now at least. Last week, a panel of experts ruled that Mexico cannot ban imports of GM corn from the U.S. for human consumption.
In 2025, a new trade conflict erupted, not with China, but across the southern border. President Donald Trump, in his second term, unleashed a wave of tariffs targeting close allies, and Mexico was caught in the storm. But what followed wasn't just a trade dispute. It was a tug-of-war between national pride and economic pressure, where the victim wasn't a corporation, but the very people growing and eating one of the oldest crops on the continent: corn. The conflict began with a familiar Trump tactic: pressure through tariffs. In early February, Trump threatened a sweeping 25% tariff on all Mexican imports. His demand was clear: deploy 10,000 troops to stem the flow of fentanyl and migrants into the United States. Mexico complied. The troops were sent. The White House paused the tariffs for 1 month. Markets responded instantly. Corn futures had crashed on Sunday night after Trump reaffirmed the tariff threat. But by Monday morning, following reports of the agreement, prices rebounded. By midweek, March corn contracts had recovered from their lowest levels in 2 months. Behind the scenes, traders and farmers breathed a cautious sigh of relief. At stake were over 312 million bushels of unshipped U.S. corn to Mexico, according to the USDA Export Inspections Report for the week ending January 30th. This wasn't just a headline, it was a massive portion of America's agricultural supply chain. But Mexico didn't back down completely. Instead of confronting U.S. tariffs with tariffs of its own, Mexico chose a different battlefield: culture and the Constitution. In early February, its Congress passed a constitutional reform declaring native corn an element of national identity and banning the planting of genetically modified seeds. The move followed years of tension over GMO corn, which Mexico largely imports from the U.S., about 23.4 million metric tons annually, according to USDA and the U.S. Grains Council. The measure didn't block imports, as Mexico was legally bound by the USMCA ruling from December 2024, but it laid the groundwork for future restrictions. By shifting the fight to seeds, not products, Mexico signaled it wouldn't tolerate foreign dominance over what it sees as cultural heritage. On both sides of the border, farmers were caught in the crossfire. In the U.S., especially in states like Iowa and Nebraska, corn producers had already pre-sold a large share of their 2024 harvest at lower prices before the market rallied. For those who waited, the gains were welcome. For those who sold early, it stung. At the same time, the National Corn Growers Association warned that even a temporary disruption to Mexican demand could result in billions in lost revenue. In Mexico, the ban on GMO planting raised new concerns. The livestock industry, which relies heavily on U.S. feed corn, feared rising feed costs. Data from the National Autonomous University of Mexico showed that 90% of tortilla samples in major cities contained traces of GMO corn, sparking debates over food security and health. Meanwhile, small farmers worried that protecting heritage seeds wouldn't be enough to fix decades of dependency created by NAFTA-era policies. By late February, the corn market had stabilized. But behind the short-term rally, the deeper conflict remained unresolved. Trump's tariff threats had forced action, but Mexico had drawn a red line: no compromise on cultural sovereignty. What began as a negotiation over border security had exposed a broader truth. When trade policy is used as a weapon, ordinary people, farmers, consumers, families are the ones who bleed. And in this case, a grain of corn became the front line. This wasn't just about agriculture. It was about power, identity, and who controls the food that feeds a nation. Trump won a tactical victory. Mexico stood its ground. But for the men and women who plant the fields, raise the animals, and feed both countries, this was a reminder: in a trade war, the fallout always lands on the farm.